Desmond Hayes was 41 years old, and most mornings in Charlotte began for him before the sun had enough courage to touch the rooftops. He worked as an operations manager for a small freight company off Statesville Road, the kind of place where problems arrived before coffee and nobody thanked the person who solved them unless something went wrong. Desmond did not mind that. He liked things that held together because someone had cared enough to check the bolts, balance the schedule, pay the invoice, call the driver, fix the hinge, replace the filter, and come home without needing applause. His life had been built that way, quietly and with both hands. At 5:30 every morning, he made coffee in the same dented steel pot, wiped down the kitchen counter while it brewed, and checked the family calendar pinned beside the refrigerator. Doctor appointments. Mortgage due dates. Keisha's prenatal vitamins circled in blue ink. A reminder to replace the loose porch light before it finally gave out. He kept the house running the same way he kept the freight yard running, not beautifully, not loudly, but with a steadiness people only noticed when it disappeared. Keisha used to call that dependable. Lately, she called it small. He heard it in the pauses more than the words. In the way she looked past his 7-year-old F-150 in the driveway. In the way her smile tightened when her friends asked what he did for work. In the way she had started saying, "Desmond is comfortable," as if comfort were a sickness a man caught when he stopped dreaming. He never corrected her. A man could explain his heart until it turned to dust and still not be heard by someone determined to misunderstand him. That Thursday evening, Desmond came home with an old cream-colored envelope folded inside the inner pocket of his work jacket. The paper inside carried the letterhead of Vivian Carter, estate attorney. He had read it 3 times in the parking lot before driving home, each sentence stranger than the last. Uncle Clarence Hayes, a man Desmond had not seen in nearly 6 years, had left him something. Not a watch. Not a box of photographs. Not a few forgotten savings bonds. A trust. A lake house. A position in a private holding company. $40 million. The number had not felt real. It still did not feel real when he pulled into the driveway and saw the porch light flickering over the welcome mat Keisha had bought 2 summers ago. The house looked ordinary. The same brick front. The same white gutters he had cleaned himself. The same bedroom lamp glowing upstairs behind thin curtains. For one brief moment, Desmond let himself imagine telling her. Maybe she would cry. Maybe she would laugh. Maybe the tension between them would finally loosen because the future had just opened a door neither of them expected. Then he stepped inside and saw the suitcase by the hallway wall. Black leather. Half-zipped. Keisha's coat folded over the handle. Something felt wrong. The kitchen light was on, but the room was too still. The washing machine hummed somewhere down the hall, turning clothes through dark water. On the marble-patterned counter he had installed with his own hands, beside a half-empty glass of water and their framed ultrasound photo, lay another envelope. Manila. Clean. Legal-sized. Desmond did not touch it at first. He looked at Keisha instead. She stood near the breakfast table in a cream sweater dress, one hand resting on her stomach, her face calm in a way that made the room colder. "I'm leaving tonight, Desmond," she said. Her voice did not shake. He waited, because something in him understood that the first sentence was not the wound. It was only the door opening. Keisha looked toward the front window, then back at him. "And I'm taking the baby to its real father." The refrigerator clicked on. Outside, a car engine idled somewhere near the curb, low and smooth, not his truck, not any neighbor's car he recognized by sound. Desmond felt the envelope in his jacket press against his chest like a second heartbeat. $40 million sat inches from his ribs, and the woman carrying a child he had bought vitamins for, assembled a crib for, and prayed over in silence had just told him he was not the father. He did not yell. He did not move toward her. He did not ask the question that tried to tear its way out of his throat. He looked at the manila envelope on the counter, then at the ultrasound photo, then at the faint reflection of headlights trembling in the dark kitchen window. The detail did not match. Keisha had said she was leaving tonight, but the suitcase looked packed with care, not panic. The papers looked prepared, not sudden. And the car outside had arrived like someone who already knew the ending. Before we go deeper into what Desmond discovered that night, tell us where you're watching from and do not forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. Desmond stayed silent. He reached for the manila envelope and slid out the papers just far enough to see the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. His name. Her name. A date from 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks. His eyes moved lower, not reading everything yet, only catching fragments. Residence. Support. No contest. Waiver. Then he saw a small yellow sticky note pressed to the signature page in handwriting that was not Keisha's. It said, "Make him sign before he asks about Malcolm." Desmond did not look at Keisha after he read the sticky note. He kept his eyes on the paper because paper did not flinch, paper did not soften, paper did not ask him to pretend the room was still the same room it had been 10 minutes earlier. The first page was clean and professional, printed on heavy white stock, the kind lawyers used when they wanted Payne to look organized. His name sat beside hers in black ink. Desmond Hayes. Keisha Hayes. Married 8 years. Irreconcilable differences. He had seen those words before in other people's lives, in courthouse stories, in quiet phone calls from coworkers who came in late with red eyes and no appetite. He had never imagined them sitting on his own kitchen counter beside a sonogram picture he had carried in his wallet for 3 months. He slid the page back into the envelope slowly. Across from him, Keisha shifted her weight, and the small movement made her keys click against the breakfast table. Her suitcase waited by the hallway like it had been standing there longer than she had. Desmond noticed that too. The tag from the airport said he bought her last Christmas was still attached to the handle, but the front pocket bulged with folded documents, not clothes. This was not a wife storming out after an argument. This was a woman leaving according to a checklist. He had built a life around checklists. He knew what preparation looked like. Earlier that same morning, before the envelope from Vivian Carter, before the kitchen went cold, Desmond had been at the freight yard by 6:15. The air had smelled like diesel, wet pavement, and coffee from the break room machine that always burned the second pot. A driver named Lewis had forgotten a delivery manifest, and Desmond had caught the mistake before the truck reached Interstate 77. A vendor had overcharged them by $418, and Desmond had found it buried in the invoice because numbers never lied when people got lazy. By lunch, he had fixed 3 problems nobody would remember by dinner. That was the shape of his days. Quiet labor. Quiet responsibility. Quiet usefulness. At home, it had been the same. He changed the air filters before Keisha had to ask. He brought ginger tea when her stomach turned. He set a pillow behind her back on the couch without making a show of it. He kept the prenatal appointment cards clipped to the refrigerator because she kept saying she did not want to feel managed, but he still wanted to be ready in case she needed him. For months, he had mistaken distance for exhaustion. Pregnancy was hard. Work was hard. Marriage had seasons. That was what he told himself when Keisha stopped reaching for his hand in the grocery store, when she began taking calls in the laundry room with the dryer running, when she laughed at something on her phone and went quiet the moment he entered. Small things. Harmless things, until they lined up in the wrong order. The detail did not match. Keisha said his name, but he heard the caution in it, the way a person speaks when they are waiting for a reaction they have already rehearsed. Desmond, please do not make this harder than it has to be. He looked at the wedding photo on the wall above the narrow sideboard. In the picture, Keisha was laughing so hard her eyes were almost closed, and Desmond was looking at her like he had just been handed something sacred. The frame was slightly crooked. He had meant to fix it all week. He wondered how long a thing could hang crooked before the whole wall started telling the truth. Outside, the car engine was still running. Low. Patient. Confident. Desmond walked to the front window, not fast enough to alarm her, not slow enough to look afraid. Through the narrow gap in the curtains, he saw a black Mercedes parked 2 houses down beneath the weak orange wash of the streetlight. The windows were tinted, but a phone screen glowed briefly behind the windshield. Someone was inside. Someone waiting. Keisha had not called a rideshare. She had not asked her sister to come get her. She had arranged a pickup. He turned back toward the kitchen, and Keisha's eyes followed him with a sharpness she tried to hide. He did not know yet who Malcolm was. Not fully. He only knew the name was important enough for another person to write it on a sticky note and careless enough to leave behind. He only knew his wife had packed before speaking, filed before crying, and brought another man close enough to idle outside their home while she ended their marriage. Desmond placed the papers back on the counter, aligned the edges with 2 fingers, and let his hand rest there for 1 second longer than necessary. The old cream-colored envelope inside his jacket felt suddenly heavier than $40 million. It felt like a door he could not open in front of her. Not yet. He looked at Keisha, then at the suitcase, then at the headlights trembling faintly against the dark glass of the window. "You should go," he said, his voice even, almost gentle. Keisha blinked as if she had expected a different man to answer. Desmond did not give her one. He only watched as she reached for her keys, and when she turned toward the hallway, the phone in her coat pocket lit up. For half a second, before she covered the screen with her palm, Desmond saw the name. The name on Keisha's phone was Malcolm. Desmond saw it only for a breath before her palm covered the screen, but a man did not need a full sentence to understand when one word had been waiting behind too many closed doors. Malcolm. The same name on the yellow sticky note. The same name sitting now between his wife and the papers she wanted him to sign. Keisha slipped the phone into her coat pocket and lifted her chin, trying to make the moment look ordinary. Desmond let her have the silence. He had learned a long time ago that silence made careless people uncomfortable, and Keisha had become careless in ways she did not realize. She picked up the suitcase, then paused as if expecting him to ask where she was going, who was waiting, how long it had been, whether the child she carried had ever belonged to the life they had been building. He asked none of it. He only opened the front door for her. The porch light flickered above them, throwing pale shadows across the brick steps. The March air was cool enough to make the kitchen warmth feel far away. Keisha stepped past him with the suitcase rolling behind her, its wheels clicking once over the threshold. She smelled like the expensive perfume she had started wearing in December, the one she said a coworker had gifted her at a holiday brunch. At the time, Desmond had believed that. He had wanted to believe it. The Mercedes 2 houses down flashed its brake lights as soon as Keisha reached the sidewalk. Not when she called. Not when she waved. As soon as she appeared. The driver had been watching the door. Something felt wrong in a cleaner, colder way now. Desmond stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame and watched Keisha walk toward the car. She did not look back until she reached the passenger side. Even then, her face was unreadable beneath the streetlight, more outline than expression. The passenger door opened from inside. Desmond saw a man's hand, a watch with a bright silver face, then the angle of a dark sleeve. Nothing more. The door closed. The Mercedes pulled away slowly, smooth and quiet, as if leaving with another man's family was just another errand completed before dinner. Desmond stayed there until the taillights turned at the end of the block and disappeared. Only then did he close the door. The house sounded different without her. Not empty exactly, but exposed. The washing machine had stopped. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, the bedroom lamp still burned behind the curtains. Desmond returned to the kitchen and stood beside the counter where the divorce papers waited. He did not touch the cream-colored inheritance envelope in his jacket. Not yet. Instead, he looked around the room like he was seeing a map after years of mistaking it for home. The family calendar by the refrigerator showed Keisha's next prenatal appointment circled in blue. She had told him the clinic changed the time from 4 o'clock to 2:30 because the doctor was overbooked. But he remembered that day. 2:30 was when she had said she needed to meet her cousin for lunch in South Park. The detail did not match. He stepped closer to the calendar. 3 appointments had been written in Keisha's handwriting over the past 2 months. All 3 had little stars beside them, not circles. He had never noticed the difference before. He noticed it now. Stars meant appointments she insisted on attending alone. Circles meant appointments she had allowed him to drive her to. His chest tightened, but his hands stayed steady. He walked to the sideboard beneath the crooked wedding photo and picked up the small stack of mail Keisha had dropped there earlier in the week. Grocery flyer. Utility bill. A baby store coupon. Then a folded receipt, half tucked beneath the frame. He almost missed it because the paper was thin and pale against the wood. It was from a restaurant in uptown Charlotte, dated 3 weeks earlier, the same date printed near the bottom of the divorce petition. 2 entrees. Sparkling water. A valet charge. Paid at 9:46 at night. Desmond stared at the timestamp. Keisha had told him she was at a prenatal nutrition class that evening. He remembered because he had made soup and left it warming on the stove until 10:15. That was the first lie he could hold in his hand. He set the receipt beside the legal papers, aligning it carefully with the edge of the counter. Then he took out his phone and photographed the sticky note, the first page of the petition, and the receipt. Not because he knew yet what he would do with them, but because the shape of his life had changed, and evidence had become more useful than emotion. Upstairs, something buzzed faintly. Desmond looked toward the ceiling. The sound came again, short and muffled. Not his phone. Not the refrigerator. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking in a house he had repaired board by board. In the bedroom, Keisha's nightstand drawer was not fully closed. A soft blue light pulsed from inside it. Desmond stood still for a moment, then opened the drawer with 2 fingers. Her old phone was inside, the one she had claimed stopped charging in January. The screen lit up with a message preview from Malcolm Reed, and the first words made the quiet room tilt around him. Did he sign it yet? Desmond did not open the old phone. He did not know the passcode, and he was not going to stand in his own bedroom guessing numbers like a desperate man trying to force a locked door. The message preview was enough for the moment. Did he sign it yet? 4 words, plain and careless, sitting on a screen Keisha had told him was broken. He photographed the phone where it lay in the drawer, the blue glow against the dark wood, the sender's full name visible now. Malcolm Reed. Then he closed the drawer halfway, exactly as he had found it. The house remained quiet around him, but it was no longer the quiet of a home settling for the night. It was the quiet of a room after someone had lied inside it for too long. Desmond walked back downstairs with the same measured steps he used at the freight yard when a shipment went missing and everyone else started talking too fast. Panic made men sloppy. He had learned that from years of fixing other people's mistakes. In the kitchen, the legal papers and receipt waited on the counter beneath the soft yellow light. His coffee mug from that morning still sat in the sink, a brown ring drying at the bottom. The ultrasound photo leaned against the fruit bowl, its black and white image facing the ceiling like a question nobody wanted to answer. Desmond reached into his jacket and finally removed the cream-colored envelope from Vivian Carter's office. The paper felt heavier now than it had in the parking lot, not because of the money, but because of the timing. He unfolded the letter slowly. Vivian's letterhead sat at the top in dark blue ink, clean and expensive without trying to be. Beneath it, the words he had read earlier returned with the weight of a second life. Estate of Clarence Isaiah Hayes. Sole beneficiary. Private Family Trust. Hayes Freight Holdings. Lake Norman Property. Estimated value pending final transfer. $40 million. Desmond stared at the number again, waiting for it to feel like something that belonged to him. It did not. It felt like a room he had not entered yet, a key placed in his hand while the house behind him caught fire. Earlier that afternoon, Vivian Carter had called while he was standing beside loading bay 3, watching two drivers argue over a late trailer. Her voice had been calm, formal, almost gentle. "Mr. Hayes, I represented your Uncle Clarence for the last 11 years. There are matters in his estate that require your immediate attention." At first, Desmond thought she meant medical bills or funeral costs. Uncle Clarence had always been distant, the kind of relative who appeared at family gatherings in a dark suit, spoke little, and left before dessert. Desmond remembered him from childhood as a tall black man with silver at his temples and eyes that missed nothing. People said Clarence was difficult. People said he thought he was better than everyone. Desmond had never believed that. He had only remembered the way Clarence once pulled him aside at a crowded 4th of July cookout and told him, "Quiet men survive loud rooms because they listen." Desmond had been 16 then. He had not understood. Now, standing in his kitchen 25 years later, he wondered if Uncle Clarence had understood him better than most people ever had. Vivian had asked him to come by before closing. Her office was on the 22nd floor of a building in uptown Charlotte, with polished stone floors and windows that held the whole city in their glass. Desmond had arrived in work boots and a navy jacket with dust on one sleeve. The receptionist looked polite but surprised. Desmond noticed that too. He always noticed the moment people adjusted their expectations downward. Vivian Carter had not. She met him in the conference room herself, a composed woman in her late 50s with short gray hair, a pearl necklace, and the kind of direct gaze that made small talk feel unnecessary. She slid the documents across the oak table and let him read before she explained. "Your uncle built more than people knew," she said. "He was very careful about privacy." Desmond remembered the words because they had landed somewhere deep. Careful about privacy. Careful about what others could see. Careful about who got access. Vivian had pointed to a paragraph in the trust documents. "These assets are structured separately. Do not deposit the funds into any joint account. Do not transfer property. Do not sign anything related to your marriage until we speak again." At the time, Desmond had thought it was standard legal caution. Now, with divorce papers on his counter and Malcolm Reed waiting behind a locked phone upstairs, the warning sounded less like procedure and more like protection. He folded Vivian's letter and placed it beside the petition, not touching the two papers together. One document represented a future Keisha knew nothing about. The other represented a past she had been planning without him. Desmond looked from one to the other, and for the first time that night, the pain inside him moved aside just enough for clarity to step through. Keisha had asked him to sign quickly. Malcolm had asked if he signed yet. Vivian had told him not to sign anything. The three facts lined up with a precision that made his skin go cold. Then his phone vibrated on the counter. A new message appeared from an unknown number with a Charlotte area code. It contained only one sentence. "Do not let your wife know what Clarence left you." Desmond stared at the unknown message until the screen dimmed. "Do not let your wife know what Clarence left you." The sentence did not feel like a warning from a stranger. It felt like a hand placed quietly on his shoulder in a room where every other person had stepped back to watch him fall. He did not reply. Not yet. He took a screenshot, saved it, and wrote the number down on the back of an unpaid water bill because paper still felt harder to erase than glass. Then he stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by two envelopes, one suitcase track still visible on the hallway rug, and the low afterscent of Keisha's perfume fading from the air. The night pressed against the windows. Outside, the street had gone still again, as if the black Mercedes had never been there. Desmond turned off the kitchen light and sat at the table in the dark with only the small lamp over the stove glowing amber. He let the facts come one at a time. Keisha had filed 3 weeks ago. Malcolm had been waiting outside. The baby she carried was not his, or at least she had said it was not. A sticky note told her to make him sign before he asked questions. Someone knew about Uncle Clarence's estate and wanted Keisha kept away from it. None of those things belonged in the same evening, and yet there they were, arranged around him like pieces of furniture in a house he no longer recognized. He looked at the ultrasound photo again. It had been taken at 19 weeks. He remembered that appointment because Keisha had not wanted him to come. She said she felt bloated, overwhelmed, tired of being watched by doctors and family and everyone who thought pregnancy made her public property. Desmond had respected that. He had driven to work instead and spent the morning pretending not to check his phone every 12 minutes. At lunch, she sent him the picture. No message at first. Just the image. Then, 5 minutes later, a single line. Everything looks fine. He had printed it at the office before coming home. Louis from Dispatch had caught him smiling at the break room printer and said, "Man, you are already somebody's dad." Desmond had laughed then, soft and proud, because the word dad had landed in him like sunlight. Now the same picture sat on the counter under a different kind of light. The joy was still inside the memory, but it had been bruised by the timing. He rose from the table and walked through the house slowly. The living room showed all the ordinary evidence of a marriage that had not looked broken from the outside. A throw blanket folded over the couch. 2 mugs on the coffee table from Sunday morning. A stack of baby books Keisha had ordered and never opened. The white crib box leaned against the wall near the hallway, still sealed, the shipping label turned outward. Desmond had planned to assemble it that weekend. He had already watched a video twice, not because he needed help with tools, but because he wanted to do it perfectly. He stopped at the hallway closet. Keisha had taken her winter coat, the black one with brass buttons, but left the gray raincoat he bought her when they first moved into the house. On the top shelf, behind a wicker basket of scarves, he saw the edge of a folder. Blue. Not his. Not one he recognized from their bills. He did not pull it down immediately. He stood there looking at it, remembering how Keisha had snapped at him 2 weeks earlier when he reached into that same closet for batteries during a storm. "I already checked there," she had said too quickly. "They are in the drawer." At the time, he had let it pass. Marriage, he believed, required letting small sharp things fall without picking each one up. But some small things were not small. Some were markers. He took the folder down and carried it to the kitchen table. Inside were printed apartment listings, all in South End, all more expensive than their mortgage. One had a red circle around the monthly rent. Another had the word available written across the top in Keisha's handwriting. Behind them was a budget sheet. Desmond read it once, then again. Rent. Utilities. Car payment. Baby expenses. Legal retainer. Expected settlement. Expected settlement. The words were typed cleanly, almost professionally, as if his life had been reduced to a line item before he was even told it was ending. At the bottom of the page was a note in smaller print. House equity after signature. Desmond sat back. His breathing stayed even, but something deep in his chest went still. Keisha had not simply confessed at the kitchen table. She had arrived there with math. She had arrived with a future already priced out. He placed the budget sheet beside the petition, the receipt, and the photograph of the sticky note. The counter was becoming a timeline. Not complete, not yet, but enough to show direction. Then his phone vibrated again. This time, the message came from Vivian Carter. "Do not respond to unknown numbers tonight. Bring everything to my office at 8 in the morning. And Desmond, whatever she left behind, do not sign a single page." Desmond did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table until the stove clock turned from 2:59 to 3 o'clock, listening to the house make small sounds around him. Pipes settling in the walls. The refrigerator cycling on and off. A car passing somewhere far enough away to belong to another life. Vivian Carter's message stayed open on his phone, bright against the dark table. Bring everything to my office at 8 in the morning. He had already placed the papers in a neat stack, the divorce petition, the yellow sticky note, the restaurant receipt, the apartment budget, the screenshot of Malcolm's message preview, the unknown warning about Uncle Clarence, and Vivian's inheritance letter. He had not signed anything. He had not called Keisha. He had not opened a bottle, punched a wall, or paced the floor like a man begging the room to explain itself. He sat still because stillness was the only thing left that belonged completely to him. Around 3:15, he remembered the front porch camera. The thought did not arrive dramatically. It came the way useful thoughts often came to Desmond, quiet and exact, after emotion had spent itself against the walls. 3 years earlier, after a string of package thefts in the neighborhood, he had installed a small camera above the porch light and another over the garage. Keisha had teased him about it at first, saying he treated their house like a freight terminal. He had smiled and told her good records saved good people from bad confusion. Now those words returned with a bitter taste. Desmond opened the security application on his phone and selected the driveway feed. The video loaded slowly, the spinning circle reflected in his tired eyes. Then the evening appeared in grainy color. His F-150 pulling into the driveway at 7:12. The porch light flickering. Him stepping out with his work jacket over one arm, the cream-colored envelope hidden inside it. He watched himself walk toward a house that still looked like home from the outside. He rewound the timeline. 7:06. 7:02. 6:58. There it was. The black Mercedes had rolled past the house once, slow enough to be looking for something, then disappeared beyond the frame. At 7:04, it returned and parked 2 houses down, exactly where Desmond had seen it later. The headlights went dark. Nobody got out. The car simply waited. Desmond leaned closer to the screen. The driver's side window reflected a streetlight, hiding most of the face inside, but he could see the shape of a man's shoulder, the brief glow of a phone, the pale flash of a watch when the driver lifted his hand. Same bright silver face. Same hand that had opened Keisha's passenger door. Malcolm had not arrived after a call for help. He had been there before Desmond walked in. That detail mattered. Keisha had not confessed and then decided where to go. She had staged an exit with someone waiting close enough to watch the front door. Desmond played the clip again. Then again. At 7:28, the porch camera caught the front door opening. Keisha stepped out first, suitcase behind her, cream sweater dress bright under the weak porch light. Desmond appeared in the doorway behind her, still as a shadow. He watched himself watching her leave, and the distance between who he had been in that moment and who he was becoming felt almost physical. The Mercedes brake lights came on before Keisha reached the sidewalk. Not after she lifted a hand. Not after she sent a message. Before. The man inside had been watching. Desmond saved the clip to his phone, then exported a copy to his email. He did not know what Vivian would need in the morning, but he knew enough not to trust memory when a record existed. The garage camera offered a wider angle. It showed the Mercedes license plate for 3 seconds when the car pulled away. Desmond paused the video, zoomed in as far as the application allowed, and wrote the number on the same water bill where he had written the unknown phone number. His handwriting stayed clean. That surprised him for half a second, then it did not. He had spent his life making himself useful under pressure. This was only a different kind of pressure. At 4:07, the old phone upstairs buzzed again. Desmond did not go up right away. He looked at the legal stack on the table, then at the dark window where his own reflection stared back at him, older than it had looked yesterday. When he finally opened the nightstand drawer, the blue screen showed one new preview from Malcolm Reed. If he asks about the car, tell him I was not there. At 7:22 in the morning, Desmond stood in front of his bathroom mirror with both hands resting on the sink and looked at a man who had aged without sleeping. His eyes were clear, but there was a heaviness beneath them that no cold water could erase. He shaved anyway. He pressed his shirt. He chose the dark blue jacket Keisha always said made him look like he was going to a parent-teacher conference instead of anywhere important. For years, comments like that had passed through him and landed nowhere. That morning, they came back arranged in a line. Small. Safe. Predictable. Comfortable. Words she had wrapped around him until they sounded almost like facts. He placed every document into a plain black folder from his home office, the same kind he used for freight contracts and vendor disputes. The folder did not look expensive. It did not need to. Inside it were the first pieces of the truth, and Desmond had learned that truth did not have to be loud to be dangerous. Before he left, he walked through the house once. The crib box still leaned unopened against the living room wall. The wedding photo still hung crooked above the sideboard. Keisha's gray raincoat still hung in the closet like a version of her that had stayed behind by accident. He did not touch any of it. He locked the front door and stood for 1 second on the porch, looking at the place where the Mercedes had waited the night before. In daylight, the curb looked harmless. That was the thing about certain damage. Morning made it look smaller than it was. The drive to uptown Charlotte took 31 minutes. Traffic moved slowly along Interstate 77, brake lights blinking red beneath a flat gray sky. Desmond kept both hands on the wheel. His phone buzzed twice in the cup holder, but he did not look at it until he reached the parking deck beneath Vivian Carter's building. One missed call from Keisha. One text. "We need to talk like adults." He read it once. Then he turned the phone face down. Adults did not send another man to wait outside while they ended a marriage. Adults did not hide legal papers under softness and call it peace. He took the elevator to the 22nd floor with the black folder under his arm and the cream-colored envelope from Clarence's estate tucked inside it. The doors opened to polished stone, quiet lighting, and city windows tall enough to make the streets below look distant and unreal. Vivian Carter was already waiting near reception. She did not smile with her mouth, but her eyes moved quickly over his face, his folder, his posture. She saw enough. "You did not sign anything," she said. It was not a question. "No," Desmond answered. "Good." She led him into the same conference room as the day before. The oak table reflected the morning light in long pale bands. Desmond sat where he had sat less than 24 hours earlier, before $40 million had become the least simple fact in his life. Vivian closed the door and placed a yellow legal pad in front of herself. "Start at the beginning," she said. Desmond opened the black folder. He did not tell the story like a broken husband. He told it like a man giving a clean report after a system failure. Time of arrival. Suitcase by the hallway. Divorce petition dated 3 weeks earlier. Sticky note. Malcolm Reed. Mercedes on camera. Restaurant receipt. Apartment budget. Unknown warning. Old phone message previews. Vivian listened without interrupting, only writing in short, precise lines. When he finished, the room held a silence that felt different from the silence in his kitchen. This one had structure. This one had purpose. Vivian finally looked up. "From this moment forward, your silence is not weakness," she said. "It is protection." Desmond felt the sentence settle inside him. Protection. Not revenge. Not panic. Protection. Vivian slid a new document across the table, turning it so he could read the heading. Temporary preservation notice. "We are going to keep your inheritance separate, preserve your records, and make sure nobody pressures you into signing away rights you do not understand." Desmond looked at the paper but did not pick up the pen yet. Through the tall window behind Vivian, Charlotte moved below them, all glass and traffic and ordinary people carrying ordinary mornings. His life had split in two, but the city had not noticed. Then Vivian's office phone rang. She glanced at the caller identification, and her expression changed by less than an inch. "That is the number that texted you last night," she said. Desmond looked at the phone, then back at Vivian. She let it ring once more before pressing the speaker button. The voice that came through Vivian Carter's office phone was male, older, and careful in the way people sounded when they had spent a lifetime measuring every word before letting it leave their mouth. "Miss Carter," he said. "This is Terrence Moore." Vivian did not relax, but Desmond saw recognition pass across her face. "Mr. Moore," she said. "You are on speaker. Desmond Hayes is with me." There was a pause on the line, not long, but heavy enough for Desmond to hear the faint sound of traffic behind the man's voice. "Good," Terrence said. "Then I will say it plainly. Clarence asked me to contact you if anything happened around the estate that did not feel right." Desmond sat still, his hand resting beside the black folder. The name Clarence landed differently now, no longer just the uncle from distant family memories, but a man who had left behind instructions for a day Desmond had not known was coming. "How did you know to text me?" Desmond asked. His voice stayed level, though the question carried more weight than he intended. Terrence exhaled softly. "Because your uncle knew people would come closer once money moved, and sometimes they come closer before the person receiving it understands what they are standing next to." Vivian's pen moved across her yellow pad. Desmond watched the ink lines form, but his mind was back in his kitchen, on the suitcase, the sticky note, the Mercedes, the phone hidden in the drawer. "Are you saying someone knew about the inheritance before I did?" Desmond asked. Terrence did not answer quickly. That told Desmond enough to keep listening. "I am saying Clarence kept records," Terrence said. "He was private, not careless. In his last month, he had concerns about someone asking questions around the wrong corners. A woman called the old office twice asking whether family trust documents became public after death. She did not give her full name. But Clarence had a way of remembering voices." Desmond felt the room narrow around him. Vivian looked up from her pad. "Did he identify her?" "Not by legal proof," Terrence said. "By suspicion. That is why I did not put it in writing." Desmond stared at the polished oak table and saw, for half a second, Keisha standing in their kitchen with one hand on her stomach, asking him not to make it harder than it had to be. He did not know yet if she had made those calls. He would not let himself know what he did not have evidence to know. But the shape was becoming harder to ignore. Vivian asked Terrence to send anything he had directly to her secure office account, then ended the call with the kind of calm finality that made Desmond understand why Uncle Clarence had trusted her. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The city moved beyond the glass, bright and indifferent. Vivian finally turned back to him. "Now we look at what is already in your possession," she said. "Not what we assume. What we can document." Desmond opened the black folder again. The papers looked different under office light, less like scraps from a broken night and more like the beginning of a record. Vivian photographed the sticky note, logged the restaurant receipt, copied the apartment budget, and asked him to forward the porch camera clips without altering the files. Desmond did exactly as she instructed. No drama. No accusations. Just dates, times, names, and documents. Then he remembered the front pocket of Keisha's suitcase. The one that had bulged with papers instead of clothes. He could still see it in his mind, folded thick near the zipper as she rolled it past him. He had not opened it. He had not touched it. But he had seen enough to know there had been more than sweaters inside. "She took a stack with her," he said. "From the suitcase?" Vivian asked. Desmond nodded. "Front pocket. Legal size. Maybe copies." Vivian wrote that down. "Good. You noticed. That matters." It should not have comforted him, but it did. Being believed for noticing felt like air after holding his breath too long. His phone vibrated again on the conference table. This time, it was a text from Keisha. "I left some things at the house. I need to come by when you are not there." Desmond read it once, then slid the phone across to Vivian without answering. Vivian looked at the screen, then at him. "She does not come to that house alone," she said. And you do not leave the evidence unsecured. Desmond thought of the old phone in the nightstand drawer, the crib box, the crooked wedding photo, the blue folder from the closet, all the ordinary places a life could hide its truth. He looked toward the window, where his reflection hovered faintly over the Charlotte skyline. For the first time, he understood that his house was no longer just a home. It was a scene full of answers, and Keisha wanted back inside before he knew which ones mattered. Desmond did not answer Keisha's text. He watched Vivian Carter place his phone back on the table as if it were another document, another item in a growing file of things that needed to be preserved instead of felt. "You respond through counsel from now on," Vivian said. Desmond nodded, but his eyes stayed on the message. "I left some things at the house. I need to come by when you are not there." The words were simple, almost reasonable, and that made them worse. They sounded like a wife asking for a sweater, not a woman who had walked out with divorce papers, a waiting car, and another man's name hidden in the corners of his house. By 9:30, Vivian had arranged for a legal courier to collect copies of the evidence, and Desmond drove back home under a sky that had turned bright and cold. The neighborhood looked the same as it always did on a weekday morning. A delivery truck idled near the corner. A woman in running shoes pushed a stroller past the mailbox cluster. A lawn crew unloaded equipment 2 houses down from where the Mercedes had parked. Desmond sat in his driveway for a moment with both hands on the wheel, not ready to let the ordinary world touch what had happened inside those walls. Then his phone vibrated again. This time it was not a text. It was a social media notification from an account Keisha had not used much in months. He opened it because the preview showed her name, and what he saw made the air in the truck feel thin. Keisha had posted a photograph. She was standing on a balcony with city lights behind her, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding a glass of sparkling water. The caption read, "Finally choosing peace." Desmond looked at the picture without blinking. The balcony railing was black metal. The skyline behind her looked like South End. He could see the edge of a man's sleeve beside her, just outside the frame, and a silver watch face reflecting light near the bottom corner. Malcolm. Keisha had cropped him almost out, but not enough. The comments were already filling in beneath the post. "So proud of you. You deserve happiness. New chapter. Protect your peace." Desmond read them with a strange calm. Nobody in those comments saw the sticky note. Nobody saw the petition dated 3 weeks earlier. Nobody saw the apartment budget that listed his house equity like a prize waiting to be cashed. They saw a pregnant woman standing under expensive balcony lights and assumed the story was simple because simple stories were easier to applaud. He locked the phone and got out of the truck. Inside, the house still smelled faintly like last night's coffee. Sunlight crossed the kitchen floor in clean rectangles. Desmond moved through each room slowly, not disturbing what did not need to be disturbed. He photographed the crib box, the sideboard, the hallway closet, the nightstand drawer with the old phone still inside. He did not open messages. He did not search beyond what was in plain view. He simply recorded the condition of his own home before anyone else came back to change the story. At 11:13, Keisha called. Her name filled the screen, soft and familiar, like the phone had not learned what he had. Desmond let it ring. A voicemail appeared 1 minute later. He played it once, standing beside the kitchen counter where the divorce papers had been. Keisha's voice was controlled, but he heard strain under it now, something tight around the edges. "Desmond, I do not want this to get ugly. I just need to pick up a few personal things. Malcolm thinks it would be better if we keep this calm. You have always been reasonable, so please do not start acting different now." Desmond replayed the sentence in his mind. Malcolm thinks. Not I think. Not my lawyer thinks. Malcolm. The man outside the house had already become part of the language of their marriage. Desmond saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Vivian. Then he stood very still because anger had finally reached him, not hot and wild, but deep and controlled, like a heavy door closing somewhere inside. Keisha believed she was ahead. She believed the post, the apartment, the waiting car, and the legal papers had turned her into the one moving forward while he stood in the ruins she left behind. She believed his quiet meant confusion. She had mistaken his restraint for weakness for so long that even now, with evidence gathering around him piece by piece, she could not imagine he was doing anything except hurting. Desmond walked to the crooked wedding photo and took it down from the wall. Behind the frame, where the backing had loosened slightly, a folded slip of paper slid out and landed against the sideboard. He stared at it for a second before picking it up. It was not old. The crease was fresh. On the outside, in Keisha's handwriting, were 2 words, "After signature." The slip of paper felt too light for what it did to the room. Desmond held it between 2 fingers and read the words again. After signature. No full sentence. No explanation. Just a marker, the kind a person leaves for themselves when they believe the future is already arranged. He unfolded it slowly. Inside was a short handwritten list in Keisha's neat, slanted script. Pick up remaining documents. Call apartment office. Confirm moving date. Ask Malcolm about wire transfer. Desmond did not breathe differently, but the space around him seemed to narrow. Wire transfer. Not baby supplies. Not doctor appointment. Not family counseling. Wire transfer. He placed the paper on the kitchen counter with the others and photographed both sides. By then the counter had stopped looking like part of a home. It looked like a timeline built from things Keisha never expected him to see. Vivian called 6 minutes after he forwarded the image. Do not speculate on the transfer yet, she said. Bring the original to my office. And Desmond, before anything else happens, we need to finish protecting what Clarence left you. He looked at the cream-colored envelope on the table. It had waited there through the night like a quiet witness. I can be there in 40 minutes, he said. Come now, Vivian answered. The second trip to uptown Charlotte felt different from the first. In the morning, Desmond had driven like a man carrying damage. Now he drove like a man carrying responsibility. The city rose ahead of him in glass and steel, the buildings catching late morning light. He passed coffee shops, office workers, delivery vans, construction crews in orange vests, people living inside ordinary hours while his own life separated into before and after. Vivian's office was ready when he arrived. Not dramatic. Not rushed. Ready. A private banker joined them by video from Atlanta. A trust officer sat beside Vivian with a tablet and a stack of documents arranged by colored tabs. Desmond noticed the tabs first. Blue for estate transfer. Green for investment accounts. Yellow for property. Red for marital protection. Vivian saw his eyes land there and spoke before he asked. The red tab does not mean conflict, she said. It means boundaries. Desmond sat down. Boundaries. That was another word Keisha had used when she began closing doors and calling it peace. But in Vivian's office, the word meant something cleaner. It meant a line drawn in ink before someone else drew it in his absence. For the next hour, Desmond signed documents that did not feel like celebration. Acceptance of trust distribution. Acknowledgement of separate property. Lake Norman deed transfer confirmation. Authorization to preserve financial records. Instruction not to commingle inherited funds with marital accounts. Every signature felt less like taking money and more like sealing a door that should never have been left open. The number appeared several times across the paperwork, $40 million expressed in formal language, divided between assets, holdings, and liquidity. Desmond read each page before signing. He asked questions. He waited for answers. He did not let the size of the inheritance make him careless. Vivian watched him with quiet approval. Clarence chose well, she said once, almost to herself. Desmond looked up. Why me? Vivian's expression softened, but only slightly. Because he said you were the only person in the family who knew how to build without performing. The sentence reached him in a place Keisha's words had worn thin over years. Comfortable. Small. Predictable. Clarence had seen the same qualities and called them something else. Built. Reliable. Worth trusting. Desmond looked down at the pen in his hand and had to wait a moment before signing the next line. At the end, Vivian slid one final document across the table. "This is not for today," she said. "This is to prepare properly if the question of paternity becomes part of the divorce proceedings. It requests that any determination be handled through the court, at the appropriate time, with no harassment, no confrontation, and no private pressure from either side." Desmond read the heading. Petition to preserve parental and financial rights pending verification. The words were clinical, but his throat tightened anyway. Somewhere inside him, there was still the man who had printed the ultrasound photo and smiled at the break room printer. That man had not vanished. He was simply sitting beside the man who now understood documents could be kinder than promises when promises had been used carelessly. He signed. Not because he wanted to punish a child. Not because he wanted to turn grief into leverage. He signed because truth had to be handled before other people turned it into a story that served them. When it was finished, Vivian gathered the papers into a black leather folder with the Hayes estate seal embossed in the corner. "By the time she realizes what you inherited," Vivian said, "she will already be outside the wall." Desmond did not smile. He only looked through the window at Charlotte spread beneath them and felt, for the first time since Keisha said she was leaving, the ground hold steady under his feet. Then his phone vibrated on the table. A new message from Keisha appeared beneath a preview image from her social media post. "Malcolm says we can settle this today if you stop being difficult." Desmond read Keisha's message twice, then placed the phone face down on Vivian Carter's conference table. "Malcolm says we can settle this today if you stop being difficult." The words would have cut deeper the night before, when his kitchen still smelled like her perfume and the ultrasound photo still looked like a promise. Now they sounded like pressure dressed as reason. Vivian did not ask to see the phone. She had already seen enough. "Then we let them believe today is about settlement," she said. "It is not." Desmond looked at the black leather folder with the Hayes estate seal resting near her hand. Inside were documents Keisha did not know existed, protected by language she had not planned around, signed before her message arrived. He understood then that timing had become its own kind of evidence. Keisha wanted speed. Malcolm wanted a signature. Vivian wanted a record. Desmond wanted the truth to stay clean enough that no one could bend it later. By 3 o'clock, a temporary mediation had been scheduled at a neutral office near the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, not because anything would be finalized that day, Vivian made that clear, but because Keisha's attorney had pushed for what he called an efficient resolution. Desmond heard the phrase and thought of the suitcase by the hallway, the sticky note, the budget sheet, and the car waiting under the streetlight. Efficient resolution. People had softer names for sharp things when they expected someone else to bleed quietly. He arrived with Vivian at 3:45. The building lobby smelled faintly of floor polish and rainwater tracked in from the sidewalk. Outside, clouds pressed low over Charlotte, turning the courthouse windows the color of dull steel. Desmond wore the same dark blue jacket, now brushed clean, and carried nothing in his hands. Vivian carried the folder. That felt right. In the elevator, Desmond watched the numbers rise and felt no urge to rehearse what he would say. He had spent years explaining himself to people who had already decided his value before he entered the room. This time, he would not spend words trying to look larger. The room was on the 5th floor, glass on one side, beige walls on the others, with a long conference table centered beneath recessed lights. Keisha was already there. She sat straight-backed in a camel-colored coat, one hand resting on her stomach, her face arranged into tired dignity. Malcolm Reed sat beside her, close enough that their sleeves touched. In daylight, he looked younger than Desmond expected, polished in the way men looked when they spent more time choosing watches than keeping promises. The silver face on his wrist flashed when he adjusted his cuff. Desmond noticed it without staring. Same watch. Same car. Same man, now inside the room where he had only been a shadow before. Keisha's attorney, a narrow man with rimless glasses, stood to shake Vivian's hand and gave Desmond a brief professional nod that did not quite become respect. "We are hoping to keep this simple," he said. Vivian smiled politely. Simple is rarely the same as accurate. Desmond took the chair Vivian indicated. He did not sit across from Keisha by accident. He sat where he could see the window, the door, the table, and Malcolm's hands. Not because he feared anyone, but because observation had become the only language that had never failed him. Keisha looked at him once, quickly, then away. The last time she had looked at him across a table, divorce papers had sat between them in their kitchen. Now there were legal pads, bottled water, and a box of tissues placed at the center of the conference table like the room expected tears and wanted credit for being prepared. Keisha's attorney began with a calm summary. Keisha wanted the marital home. Temporary support during pregnancy. A non-disparagement agreement. A quick signature to avoid stress. A private settlement before emotions made matters worse. Desmond listened to each item land on the table. House. Support. Silence. Signature. It was the same list from her budget sheet, only translated into legal language and spoken aloud by someone in a suit. Malcolm leaned back slightly, relaxed, as if this were going exactly the way he had imagined. Keisha kept her eyes lowered, but Desmond saw her thumb move over her phone beneath the edge of the table. The detail did not match the image of a woman too fragile for conflict. Vivian let the attorney finish. She let the room sit in his version of events for 3 full seconds. Then she opened the black leather folder and removed a single page, placing it flat on the table with 2 fingers. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Malcolm. She looked at Keisha's attorney. "Before we discuss what Mrs. Hayes wants," Vivian said, "we need to discuss what she attempted to take." Desmond felt the room change before anyone spoke. Malcolm's chair stopped moving. Keisha's hand froze over her phone. And for the first time since she walked out of their house, Desmond saw uncertainty cross her face. Vivian Carter did not push the page across the table. She placed it where everyone could see it, but not touch it, and that small decision told Desmond she had chosen control before the first sentence left her mouth. Keisha's attorney leaned forward, eyes narrowing behind rimless glasses. Malcolm Reed stopped resting back in his chair. Keisha looked at the paper, then at Desmond, as if trying to measure how much he knew from the way he breathed. Desmond gave her nothing. He sat with his hands folded loosely on the table and watched the room begin to understand that silence had not meant surrender. Vivian spoke in the same calm voice she had used that morning in her office. "This is a preservation notice regarding marital financial records, potential dissipation of joint assets, and undue pressure connected to a proposed waiver." Keisha's attorney cleared his throat. "That is a serious framing, Miss Carter." "It is a serious timeline," Vivian replied. She placed a second page beside the first. "The petition your client presented to Mr. Hayes was prepared 3 weeks before she disclosed her intent to leave. On that same date, Mr. Hayes has a restaurant receipt placing Mrs. Hayes in Uptown Charlotte at 9:46 at night, during a time she represented to him as a prenatal class." Keisha's face changed only slightly, but Desmond had known her long enough to see it. A tightening near the mouth. A small withdrawal of the shoulders. Malcolm looked at her, quick and sharp, then back to Vivian. He did not speak. Vivian continued. "We also have a handwritten note attached to the signature page instructing her to make him sign before he asked about Malcolm." The room went still. Keisha's attorney turned toward her. Not dramatically. Not accusingly. Just enough for Desmond to see that this was the first item he had not expected. Keisha whispered something too low for Desmond to hear. Her attorney did not answer. Vivian placed the photograph of the sticky note on the table next. Then the apartment budget. Then the screenshot of the message preview from the old phone. Then the porch camera still showing the black Mercedes arriving before Desmond entered the home. Each item landed softly, but the room felt heavier after every one. Desmond watched Malcolm's expression shift from confidence to calculation. It was not fear. Not yet. It was the face of a man realizing the story had more pages than he had read. "My client is not here to argue emotion," Vivian said. "He is here to prevent a rushed signature obtained under incomplete and misleading circumstances." Keisha finally looked directly at Desmond. Her eyes were bright, but he could not tell whether it was anger, embarrassment, or something closer to panic. He did not try to name it. Naming her feelings had never helped him understand her actions. Her attorney adjusted his glasses. "None of this changes the fact that there are marital issues to resolve." "Correct," Vivian said. "But it does change the leverage your client believed she had." Then she opened the black leather folder with the Hayes estate seal. Desmond felt the room tilt toward that folder before anyone knew why. Vivian removed a certified estate summary and placed it beside the other documents. Yesterday afternoon, before Mrs. Hayes presented the petition, Mr. Hayes was notified that he is the sole beneficiary of the Clarence Isaiah Hayes Family Trust. The inheritance includes separate property, protected holdings, and assets valued at approximately $40 million. For the first time, Keisha stopped looking composed. Her lips parted, but no words came. Malcolm turned fully toward her now, and Desmond saw something cold pass across the man's face. It was not the shock of someone worried for Keisha. It was the shock of someone realizing the door to a vault had closed before he reached it. Vivian did not pause long enough for the silence to rescue them. "Those assets have not been commingled. They were accepted and protected this morning. Mrs. Hayes has no automatic claim to them. Any attempt to pressure Mr. Hayes into a broad waiver before disclosure of this inheritance will be addressed in the record." Keisha's hand moved from her stomach to the table edge, fingers pressing lightly against the wood. She looked at Desmond again, and this time he saw the question she did not ask. "Why did you not tell me?" The answer sat between them like the oldest truth in the room. Because she had left before she knew what he was worth. Malcolm leaned close to Keisha and said something under his breath. Desmond could not hear the words, but he saw her flinch as if the tone had carried enough meaning by itself. That was the second collapse. The first was legal. The second was personal. Keisha had walked into the room with a man beside her and a plan in front of her. Now the plan had holes, and the man beside her was staring at those holes like they belonged to her alone. Vivian gathered the documents into a neat line. "Mr. Hayes will not sign today," she said. "Mr. Hayes will not be pressured today. And any future conversation will include the financial records, the timeline, and the question of paternity handled through the proper court process." Desmond stood only after Vivian did. He did not look victorious. He did not feel victorious. Victory was too loud a word for a moment that still had an ultrasound photo inside it. But as he turned toward the door, Keisha said his name once, small and stunned. Desmond paused, hand near the chair back. Malcolm was looking at the table. Keisha was looking at him. And Desmond understood that for 8 years she had mistaken quiet for empty, patience for weakness, and loyalty for something she could spend. He did not answer her. He walked out with Vivian into the courthouse hallway, where the polished floor reflected the gray afternoon light, and behind him, through the closing conference room door, he heard Malcolm say, "You told me he had nothing." Desmond heard Malcolm's words through the closing door, but he did not turn around. "You told me he had nothing." The sentence followed him down the hallway with more force than shouting could have carried. It was not just an accusation aimed at Keisha. It was the whole truth of their mistake, spoken by the man she had chosen. They had measured Desmond by the truck in his driveway, the work boots by his back door, the quiet way he paid bills and fixed loose hinges and made room for other people's comfort. They had mistaken a modest life for an empty one. Vivian Carter walked beside him without rushing. Do not answer anything from them tonight, she said. If she calls, save it. If he calls, save it. If anyone threatens legal action, forward it to me. Desmond nodded. He understood. Evidence, boundaries, silence. The three things that had carried him through the last 24 hours. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the courthouse steps dark and shining under the afternoon light. He stood beneath the overhang for a moment, watching cars move through puddles on East 4th Street. Charlotte kept breathing. Office workers hurried past with coffee cups and folders. A bus hissed at the curb. Somewhere, a siren passed and faded into the city. The world did not pause because his marriage had become a file on a conference table. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe it was just how life reminded a man that pain was not the whole sky. His phone vibrated before he reached the parking deck. Keisha. He let it ring. A voicemail followed. He did not play it until he was sitting in his truck with the door closed and the gray light across the windshield. Her voice came through smaller than it had been in the kitchen. Desmond, I did not know about Clarence. I did not know any of that. We should talk before things get worse. She stopped, and in the silence behind her he heard a muffled sound, maybe traffic, maybe a door closing, maybe Malcolm somewhere nearby. Then she said the sentence that settled everything. If I had known, I would have handled this differently. Desmond closed his eyes. Not because it hurt more than the rest, but because it explained the rest. If I had known. Not if I had loved you better. Not if I had told the truth sooner. Not if I had respected the man who stood beside me for 8 years. If I had known. He saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Vivian. Then he started the truck. That night, he did not go back to the house first. He drove north toward Lake Norman, following Vivian's directions to the property Uncle Clarence had left him. The road narrowed after a while, passing tall pines, quiet mailboxes, and long driveways hidden behind black iron gates. The lake house sat back from the water on a gentle slope, not flashy, not oversized, but solid in a way that felt deliberate. Stone steps. Dark wood beams. Wide windows facing the water. A dock reaching into the evening. Desmond parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time before getting out. The key Vivian had given him felt cold in his palm. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and closed rooms waiting to be opened. In the study, he found a photograph of Uncle Clarence on a bookshelf, older than Desmond remembered, wearing a dark suit and standing beside the lake with one hand in his pocket. Behind the frame was a folded note with Desmond's name on it. The handwriting was careful, strong despite age. Desmond opened it beneath the desk lamp. It said, "You were never small. You were only surrounded by people who needed you to be." He sat down slowly. For the first time since Keisha placed those papers on the kitchen counter, his hands trembled. Not from fear. Not from rage. From the strange grief of being seen too late by one person and not at all by another. Weeks later, the legal process moved forward through Vivian's office. The house stayed protected. The inheritance stayed separate. The questions about paternity were placed where they belonged, inside the court's process, not in hallway arguments or late-night messages. Keisha's social media went quiet. Malcolm disappeared from the edges of her photographs. Desmond did not ask why. He did not need to. Some people only stay for the story they think they are buying. On a clear Saturday morning, Desmond returned to the old house with movers and removed what was his. Tools. Books. His grandmother's Bible. The unopened crib box remained in the living room until the court decided what came next. He paused by the wall where the wedding photo had hung. The space behind it was lighter than the paint around it, a clean rectangle left by years of pretending something was fixed. Desmond touched the wall once, then walked out. By sunrise the next day, he stood on the dock at the lake house with a mug of black coffee in his hand. Mist hovered above the water. The world was quiet, but this quiet did not feel like emptiness. It felt like ownership. Not of money. Not of revenge. Of himself. He thought about Keisha's last words to him, about Malcolm's voice through the conference room door, about Uncle Clarence's note on the desk. Then he let the morning take the weight of it. Some people do not leave because you have no value. They leave because they never had the vision to see it before the world put a price tag on you. Desmond took